but it would be next week. And then that's because of the content of the class. It's on the Exodus, and I feel like we all need to like kind of solidify our Exodus experience. And that is why we have pre-work for next week. And we have a, 1-2, order here. And let's see, a couple things about that. You can kind of like, read the comments. And then in the end of the outline, there's what I call a supplemental section. And I've listed all the places in the Old and New Testament that review the history of Israel. And what it shows is that the history of Israel was so important to Israel. That was their kind of like, it defined them. And I think for us also, our exodus from our Egypt and our entering into the land is also defining for us. And so if you have extra time, you could read all of those chapters. And I sometimes tell the Lord, if I had more time, I would want to study each of those chapters and find out what angle of the Exodus is portrayed or emphasized throughout the history of Israel. It's repeated. So anyway, as you can tell, I'm kind of excited about next week's class. And I hope you can share that. And especially if you have more time, you could get into those obscure chapters. Some of them you might never have read, but then you could ask, what is he emphasizing of the history? And then that may help solidify your own Exodus story. Okay, so that is for next week. And then for this week, I want to talk about the patriarchs. And I hope when we go over this, we can just be impressed by how much the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are actually our stories. And I feel like any believer who wants to experience God in a deeper way must know these stories, not just as history, but as patterns and as models for how we experience God. And I'm not alone in this. I'll read some of these quotes, and you can kind of just read over them. I won't do all of them because of time, but ultimately, it is Watchman Nee. Ultimately, is a combined experience of these three that accounts for the course followed by God's people on earth. Skipping down to A.W. Pink, it is intensely interesting to mark how each of the patriarchs foreshadowed some distinct truth in a believer. And I'll let you read the rest. F.W. Grant, in Abraham, we find manifested the type of the father, and in Isaac, admittedly, that of the son. In Jacob Israel, we find a type and pattern of the Spirit's work, which is again and again dwelt on and expanded in the after scriptures. And so you can see that there's kind of a lineup with commentators, Bible studiers from very different backgrounds, and of like the importance of the experience of these four people. And Genesis only uses 2 chapters to talk about the entire creation of and then it uses, but it's 50 chapters, and here we're gonna be covering about 38 chapters. And then most of those chapters are about the experience of these people, these characters with God. And it's like God is emphasizing, I want you to highlight these experiences. And a deeper message is, I would like these experiences to be yours. So I want to talk about each one and just spend maybe 10 minutes on each of these characters. And I hope, another thing about these characters is I consider them in ascending or descending order. Ascending meaning it's a higher experience. It's a richer experience. Descending means it's a deeper one. It's a deeper one. So maybe all of us can identify with Abraham. Praise the Lord. Then we'll talk about Isaac, and maybe we'll lose maybe 10% of the people on the Zoom. Praise the Lord. And then the other ones will be like, yeah. And then we'll talk about Jacob, and then we might lose another 30% or 40% because it's a deepening experience. And then when we talk about Joseph, maybe some of us will say, I have no idea what you're talking about, because there's something higher and something even more. And so I think we can look at this, and maybe you can even measure your own experience of like, when do I stop? When do I stop? And then we can kind of know like how far we can go. So first one, Abraham. And it's the experience of God the Father's calling and promises through a life of faith and obedience. And his life just exhibits these very basic things. It begins with like God, and I could say God the Father's calling. God says, go forth from your country, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, will bless you, make your name great. I will bless those who bless you. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And it started with God calling this man. And that's like our first experience of the Father. Abraham was living on the other side of the river, worshiping idols with his family. And then one day, the God of glory just appeared to him. And he said, just go forth from your country, from your relatives. And he tasted that experience of leaving something that was his life before and going to a new place. And what is the most basic experience of the Father? He called you. That the Father called you. It's like walk worthily of the calling with which you are called. He called you into his own kingdom and glory. And you just see this with Abraham's life. He responded to the call of God. And that's the same with us. We have so many things in our life, but we respond to that. We leave them and respond to the call. And Abraham also became very familiar with promises. And, when God called him, he didn't just give him everything right at the beginning. That would be very simple. And God is not quite that simple. He wants to have us walk with him. And Abraham did walk with him. And there's a lot of relationship, you can see of Abraham that Abraham has with God. And it's a beautiful, one person said, romantic. I like that phrase. I like that word, a romantic relationship with God. So, he says to Abraham, you're going to have a son. But then Abraham doesn't have a son for many, many years. And he says, I'm going to give you this land. But Abraham's like, how do I know? So in Genesis 15:4, the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir. Abraham was thinking, maybe that my servant in my house will be the heir. It's like, no, but the one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. And then Abraham just kind of asks him, like, how will I know? And this is what he does, and this is what he exhibits, this kind of like closeness in relationship with God. So God may promise you something of every spiritual blessing, and then you just feel like, I am not experiencing that. And then you're like, is this all there is in the church life? Is this all there is in the Christian life? And then God might say something like, no, one who comes forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. There's something more. And you have to like journey with God like Abraham did. And again, God promises him the land. And he said, I am the Lord who brought you out of the Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land. And then Abraham, in the tenderest way, I think this is one of the most beautiful verses in terms of relationship. In verse 8, he says, oh, Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it? I love that. Okay, let me ask you a question. If God himself tells you, I will give you this land, what would you do? You would most likely just say like, yeah, amen, because that's God. And then you are you. But if you would say, I would just say yes. I don't know if you really know God or you know yourself. You know what? More likely, you might just say like, the Lord, how will I know? How will I know? And that was Abraham's. And then it's like putting God in a position. It's like, how can I make Abraham know? And then God made this marvelous thing. He said, bring me 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove and a young pigeon. It's like, what's going to happen with that? And then God says, cut him, chase the birds away, cut him. Wait, there's going to be a fire and an oven and a smoking furnace. And then on that day, the Lord made a covenant. And then all of a sudden, Abraham's experience of the Father was just like, it's increased. Now I have a covenant. With a covenant, it means we know what God will do because he promised. So, some people might say like, you can never know what God will do. It's presumptuous. But with Abraham, if you would ask Abraham, what will God do? He could say, he'll give this land to my descendants. That, he knows. It's amazing. And for us today, you kind of like grow from being called out of the ugly world that you were in to receive some of the promises of God. And then you might say, how will I know? And then those promises are embodied in a covenant. And then you begin to follow God in terms of covenant, his word, something solid that he did. And so if somebody says, how do you know what God will do? You could say, I know, because he has a covenant. And, when Abraham kind of like continues his life with his romantic journey with God, he has a lot of failures. He's like, God said to him, the one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. So he had an idea, let's have a child with, Sarah said, have a child with my maidservant. And so he had a child with her. That was 13 years before this time that he appears in Genesis 17. And that child was not the one that God was going to make the heir. And, and then God appears again in terms of covenant. And it just became more and more clear, not in Abraham's theological theory, but in his practical life and intimate relationship with God. So when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty, walk before me, be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. A little bit later, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. And then I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And you can just see how, like, in this relationship that Abraham experiences, look at how many everlastings are in this verse. And it's like, just kind of like touching that. And it's in a very practical context. Am I going to have a child with Sarah, and then, will you give me this land? Those are very practical things, but it's like Abraham's touching something of like eternity, everlasting. And we saw last week, this involves God promising things to Christ, and we're a part of that. But in this emphasis here tonight, it's just like you touch something of the eternal one. And this is what Abraham does. It's like, I am called by God. He's promised me something. And then as I interact with him, I realize I'm touching these eternal things. And I don't know how it will be, but then God just makes his promises more and more sure by making a covenant in 15, establishing a covenant in 17. And then we just realize that, at this point, Abraham would be following God based on his word. And we follow God based on the new covenant. And then the doorway into this is faith. He just believed in the Lord. And then in terms of like practical theory, you're just like, I just think I get it. I think I need to work on it a little bit more. But then in terms of faith, you could just say like, yes, faith is something instilled in us through multiple appearings of God. That's what happened with Abraham. 7 appearings, somebody wrote. And then he could say this verse, I believe God. And he reckoned it to him as righteousness. After 7 appearings, God just infused an element that could believe. And then it's like the faith that was in Abraham through those appearings just took hold of something of God and his promises and said, amen. Firmly believe, firmly lay hold. Finally, the final thing I want to touch, Abraham invested so much with God for Isaac, and eventually Isaac was given to him. And in Isaac, all of those, promises would be fulfilled. And then God, the Father, just has this kind of experience like, I want to make you pure. And can you offer your only son, the one you love, on the mountain? Offer him to me. And I could just not even imagine what's going through Abraham when God asks him to offer Isaac. It's God says the one you love. And that is the first time love is ever mentioned in the Bible. First time Abraham loves Isaac. You never see Adam love God, Noah loved God, never see it. Eve loved Adam, you never see it. First mention of love is your son, the one you love. And you see, Abraham loved. And then God asked him to offer the one he loved. And also the one who was invested with all the promises of God. And, Abraham experienced the Father. And this is an experience of the Father. The Father, if any branch bears fruit, you know what the Father does? He prunes it that it may bear more fruit. And I sometimes think about like Abraham as this very fruitful branch. And then God the Father would just say like, I think I have to like prune. Maybe he has like an overly trusting reliance on Isaac, but not on me. Abraham, offer the son, the one you love. And Abraham does it. And when he does it, it's just, by myself, I have sworn, because you have done this thing and not withheld your son, I will greatly bless you, multiply your seeds. in you, in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And you see an experience of the Father. And Isaac will go on. It's just experience of Christ as a son, the heir of God's riches. You know, Abraham offered, and we talked about that before, what he went through. But you think about Isaac, and you know, Isaac was not a, don't think Isaac was a baby. Don't think he was a baby like Lexi's baby. Um, uh, he he had he was able to talk. You know, he was walking with his dad up the mountain, and you know, he just said like, you know, Father, and Abraham says, here I am. Well, we have the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? You know, Isaac's asking the father, where's the lamb? And then Abraham says, the Lord will supply. And then, you know, so think about somebody maybe 13 years old. I don't know how old exactly. Then he came to the place, and Abraham built the altar there, arranged the wood, and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Can you just imagine that? This is Isaac's entrance, laying there. I wish I had a demonstration. Just lay there. While my father just puts a binding on top of the wood. And there's no struggle. There's no questioning. He just laid him on the altar. And then Abraham stretched out his hand and took a knife to slay his son. And Isaac just laid there. We know the story, you know, then God, Father, stopped his hand. And then he looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns, replaced the ram. And Isaac was, in a sense, raised from the dead. Even Hebrews 11:19, he considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead. Look at this, from which he also received him back as a type. And I'm kind of belaboring this point because, like, that's the essence of Isaac. He's dead and resurrected. And he just got him back as like a resurrected type. And in that realm, the resurrection is a realm. It's not an act that you have to like replay or what. You get into this realm. And in that realm of resurrection, you just receive what God gives. And so in Isaac's life, we don't see struggle. You don't see confusion. You don't see like striving, like in other places, or even that much suffering. It's like this: I'm dead and resurrected. I'm dead with him, resurrected with him. What do I do in that realm? I receive. And then all of God's riches are just available. So in Isaac's life, you just see like so many things he does. It's just like, I ask and God provides. You know, Jacob will serve, you know, maybe 14 years for his wife, you know, a long time. And then this is Isaac's experience of a wife. He had come from going to Bela Haroi. He was living in the Negev. Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. He lifted up his eyes and looked. Behold, camels were coming. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. Isaac brought her into Mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah. She became his wife. Now, like, I had to do more than this to get married to my wife, Rose. I had, like, I had to do much more than go meditate in a field. And then, she came on a camel and then we got married. But Isaac was just receiving. And the servant, Eliezer, went and did all of those things to get Rebecca. But the church was just, Rebecca was just presented to him. And just like the church will be presented to Christ, it's like God the Father does all the work. It's like presented. But Isaac was just a life of receiving. Abraham just gave all that he had to Isaac. Abraham was a rich man, and he was enriched by God. And then Isaac didn't do anything, just received it all. He just got it all. And he didn't have any competition. Abraham made sure of that. And then Abraham just like, I'll give you everything. And then this is a secret of the Christian life and the experience of Isaac in our experience. Lord, I just receive. You've done it all. I just pray a little bit. There's Rebecca. I just receive from my father, Abraham. And then he gives everything. And Christians feel they're so poor, but they don't realize the experience of Isaac. And the entrance into that experience is this: I just lay upon the altar. Just lay upon the altar. Death, resurrection, riches. This is what Isaac shows. And then, Isaac was barren. Rebecca was barren. They couldn't have kids. And I love this. Abraham struggled for years and made so many mistakes. How will I know? What about Ishmael? Would he live before you? What about Eliezer, my servant? Would he be the heir? And then after years and years and all these ideas, you know what Isaac did? He just prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife, and the Lord answered him, and Rebecca, his wife, conceived. That's it. And he just like, Lord, I just want to be Isaac. Thank you. Thank you for this whole experience. He stays in the land. He never leaves the land. Every other person leaves the land. Abraham leaves the land, goes to Egypt. Jacob leaves the land. He goes to Padan Aram. Joseph leaves the land. He goes to Egypt. Isaac stays in the land the whole time. You know what that means? He stays in the Lord's blessing. He says, there's a famine in the land, and Abraham would go down to Egypt because of the famine. And then the Lord's like, don't go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land. I will be with you. And bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these land. I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. I will multiply your descendants as the stars. And then look at verse 5. Because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my covenants, my laws, then I will bless you, because it's not that you obeyed me, Isaac. Abraham did. All you're doing is just receiving. That's it. That's it. We need this kind of life, because we could be so dry, so burned out, so empty of all of those things. We don't realize there's just like a experience of Isaac, and then our fathers, Abraham, he obeyed, and then you know what? I'll bless. Even there's a famine, it's just like God will just bless. I will sojourn in this land. I will be with you, bless you, because I'm going to give everything. Why? Because you're just in the right line. And then Isaac, even he learns how to invest. Sometimes you just receive, sometimes you invest in the Lord, and then sometimes we invest something in the Lord and we just feel like we didn't get back much. Whatever, church got hurt because I invested instead of help. But look at this. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in that same year 100-fold. That's a promise of the parable of the seeds. And some will bear good fruit, 30, 60, and 100-fold. And you could just imagine, you put one seed in the ground, boom, and then 100-fold. And I taste this sometimes when I'm with somebody where God is really moving in that person, and I just feel like I just say one thing, and then boom, they just have such a response. Why? Because there's a reaping of 100-fold, because I am experiencing the blessing of Isaac. And the man became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. That is a promise. That's the experience of Isaac. Lord appeared to him the same night after he finally dug a well that was not contested. I just go another place, and then he calls it Rehoboth, because the Lord has given me a lot of room. I'm finally free to enjoy the water, free to enjoy everything. Don't fear, I'm with you. I will bless you, multiply your descendants for the sake of Abraham, my servant Abraham. So I built the altar there, called upon the name of the Lord, pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. And you just see, like, wow, what a, out of the four, I just want to stay in Isaac. That's the best. That is the absolute best. And then Abraham's good, but maybe you just don't know what's going on. But Isaac is just a life of receiving, and based on death and resurrection. And when you're in that realm, it's a realm of resurrection, then all the promises of God are there available. Okay. Jacob is so different. His experience, according to what was that? Grant, I think it was Grant. I forgot who. Of God as the Spirit. And Jacob, you really see transformation, the transformation of his believers into the image of the Son. And you kind of like see this with Jacob, and we see a lot of details about his personality. And he started off, he's not a nice man at all, not a nice man at all. And he had a brother, Esau, and I won't go into the details of the story, but Esau was a hunter. Jacob was more liked to dwell in tents. And so Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished." So Jacob was kind of making some stew, some lentil soup. And then Jacob said, "No, first sell me your birthright, Esau. Behold, I am about to die." Esau said, "Behold, I'm about to die. So of what use then is this birthright to me?" And Jacob said, "First swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Well, the good part about Jacob was, like, he really valued that birthright. And Esau was the firstborn, so he did, rightfully have the claim to the birthright. But Jacob was just a kind of conniving person. And if somebody's that hungry, you don't put their feet to the fire and make them do something. But Jacob did that, and and he's kind of like this kind of person. And then it happened again with the blessing of Isaac. Jacob disguised himself as Esau, and so that Jacob would bless him, Isaac would bless him as if he were Esau, and he would receive all the blessing. And then if you wonder, like, did he really, was he really that bad? And then there's one verse which is let me just get it here. Yeah. Genesis 27:24, where Isaac asked him directly, "Jacob, are you my son Esau?" And Jacob said, "I am." He just lied right there. He just lied right there. And then you see this liar, cheater, conniver, and then Jacob blessed him. Isaac blessed him. And then you just see like, wow, this person has so many problems, so many issues. He's got character problems. He's got constitutional problems. And the question is, how can someone like that be in the line of God's promises? And that's where the story of Jacob is so important. Because even though he had these issues, and some people said, well, this was his sinful nature. I would say, yes, it was part of the sinful nature, and it was also just a part of his natural man, his old man, as the New Testament say, or soulish man. He was shaped in such a way. He was conniving, cheating. Yes, it was sinful, but also a lot of natural energy. But there are two things about this man that are noticeable. Number one, God loved him. In the New Testament, it says, and even in the Old, it says, Jacob, I loved. And then also, he chose him. And if you want to see, like, what is the way God works with a person like this so wrong, you look at Jacob's life. And then when Jacob was running away, thinking Esau is really going to kill me, his mom just, arranged that he would go away to his uncle's house, maybe, find a wife, work there. He just appeared to him. And I'll read up a few things. He had a dream. Behold, a ladder was set on earth, top reaching heaven. And Jacob just saw something of that. The heavens. And we know from the New Testament when Jesus in John 4 says, that was me. John 1, that was me. That's me. So he saw this heavenly ladder. And in 13, behold, the Lord stood and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, God of Isaac. The land which you lie, I will give it to your descendants. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. You'll spread to all those corners. In your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. And it's almost like, how could God choose such a deceitful, lying person? But he does, and he works with him. Because why? He loved him, and he chose him before he did anything, good or bad. That's the New Testament. And in Jacob, you see like the experience of this. You are the wrong person to serve the Lord. You, I'm talking about you. And then you get that, I am the wrong person to serve. You're wrong. And you're like, how can I go on? I can't receive like Isaac. I can't, follow like Abraham. There's got to be something more because it's so wrong. You need Jacob. And then he went through a period of 20 years working with Laban, his uncle. And then, he complains about him because if Jacob was a conniver, his uncle was like a conniver times 2. And he could beat some things with Jacob. So they're kind of competing each other. Who could cheat the other one out of what, And so, that I serve your father with all my strength. Eventually, Jacob marries his daughter. And then I've served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. God did not allow him to hurt me. But you see, with Jacob's life, and there are many other things that are kind of a suffering in this, but he used the environment to kind of like soften Jacob. And you find Jacob hardly ever prayed. He just hardly ever prayed. When he was talking to God, it was more transactional. Like, what can you give me? I'll give you this. Then, so you don't see like that spiritual of a man, but he just used that Laban experience to change his wages 10 times. He, he wanted to marry Rachel, but then, in the marriage night, Laban put Leah into the marriage chamber. And he woke up, it's Leah. And then he had to work for more years for Rachel, his, the one he wanted to marry. And he just went through all kinds of experience. And sometimes maybe you will go through all kinds of experience and you're like, why? And then God would say, if you touch the Jacob experience, it's because of you. It's because of you. I am working on that. I'm kind of softening those things. You're like a jar that's like so tightly sealed. And I just want to unseal it. And, finally, Jacob leaves Laban. And he has this special experience when he leaves at the brook called Jabbok, which is kind of a picture of the cross. And he's worried that he's going to go back to his brother Esau, and Esau's just going to kill him. He's just worried. It's kind of intense. And then Jacob did something which is really marvelous. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And we find out this man is God himself. And I want to point out one thing. It's not like Jacob said, I'm going to wrestle with God. He was alone. And you know who initiated? God. And then it's a literal struggle. God. And you see in Jacob a wrestling with God, which is something that will result in that thing in Jacob touched. And then it's amazing. 25, when he, that's God, saw that God, had not prevailed against him, Jacob, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while Jacob wrestled with God. It's amazing. I'm very touched by this because if I would say there's a wrestling match and these are the contenders, God versus you, who will win? Well, if it were God versus Jacob, you know who won? Jacob. And you may say, that shouldn't be. How can Jacob win against God? And I would say, if you think this, you don't really know yourself. Because a lot of times, God wrestles against you. But who wins? It's not God that wins. It's you. It's not God that wins. It's Rex, because so strong. But then God just touches the socket of Jacob's thigh, and it's dislocated. And we see that he limped from that time forward. And let me tell you, this is a story, an essential story of Jacob. It's I wrestle with God. I won, but I'm different now. And I used to walk with a strong gait, and now I limp. I'm changed. How do you get changed by God? In Jacob's story, you need to be softened by your environment, and then you wrestle. And then when God comes, you wrestle. You wrestle. And you may win, but he touches something. And when he touches something, you're just different. He said, let me go, God said. And no, I won't let you go unless you bless me. So Jacob was holding him this way. And then 28, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and men and have prevailed. So God changes his name. And then I like Jacob's story. If you follow it from this point on, you would think okay, God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So the next chapters, all the chapters after that, it should be Israel, 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 Israel. But it's not. It's not. You know what that means? you think you've changed, and you really, it's a slow process. It's like it goes Jacob, Israel, Jacob, Israel, Jacob, Israel. Even at the end, still Jacob. And then, you just realize God's process of changing somebody is slow, but it's real and it's solid. At the end, you just see Jacob as a different kind of person. At the end of his life, there was a famine in the land, and his family went down to Egypt and had to go there. And he had lost Joseph by this time, his favorite. And then he had Benjamin, his other favorite son. And, and he wanted to keep Benjamin in Egypt in Canaan, send his family to Egypt. And then Joseph was disguising himself in Egypt and asked to bring Benjamin down. So Jacob is just like, you're just tearing me apart. And he finally said this word, this is 43:14, Genesis 43:14. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved about Benjamin. And just like, Lord, I just finally just stop struggling. I just accept it. You can kind of see a change. And then finally, they told him, Joseph is alive in Egypt. And I love this verse in 45, 26, 27. They told him saying, Joseph is alive. Indeed, he is ruler over all the land. And then it says this, he was stunned. Jacob was stunned. And the literal Hebrew is his heart was numb. His heart was numb. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, then the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And this is very instructive in showing Jacob's change, because he was stunned in his heart. His heart was numb, but his spirit was alive. His soul was finally controlled and reserved, and his spirit could be alive. And so all the rest of his life, you see Jacob as a blesser. He was a blessing. Genesis 47:7. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob, presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. The Bible says, Hebrews says, the greater is blessed, the lesser is blessed by the greater. And here, Jacob blessed Pharaoh, meaning Jacob was higher, was greater than Pharaoh. He was the greatest man alive, not because of his wealth, not because of his cunning, not because of his charisma, but because of God's work in him. All the wrestling, all the suffering, all the appearings, all the heart numb and spirit alive. And then he became a person blessing. And even at the end of his life, Joseph took both of his own sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, put them in front of Jacob to bless. And he put Jacob's right hand close to Manasseh, who was the firstborn. And then Jacob crosses his hands and then blesses Ephraim because he was the one that would be blessed more than Manasseh. And with full understanding, Jacob is blessing people. And he became a source of blessing. Today in the church, I would say why are we lacking blessing in the church so much? Because we lack this experience of Jacob going through all of these trials, all of these things, and then finally being transformed, being changed by God, and you become a source of this blessing. In Joseph, we see a deep experience, suffering and reigning with Christ. And with Joseph, he was maybe the perfect child. And in fact, it's hard to find any mistake he made in the whole Bible. So you just see well, what a perfect person. And unlike Jacob, you don't see any problem with Joseph. And he saw this dream. He had this dream. And he tells his brothers, listen to the dream. We were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and stood erect, and your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. So he he saw something about his reigning, his ruling. And I think every believer needs to see some vision of like, God, you've placed me there. But then how do you get there? And like, I have been joined with Christ, seated with Christ in the heavenlies. There's something reigning. I am reigning in life through the one, Jesus Christ. There's a reigning. It's like I see a vision. I see something higher. My Christian life is for something high. And then the way Joseph got there was not a simple path. His brothers got jealous of him because, like, who could have this dream about my sheep worships yours? So they trapped him in a pit, sold him to some Ishmaelites, which I would like to get into. I don't have time. And then they sold him to a family in Egypt. Potiphar was his name, sold him to Potiphar's house. And then he was kind of like, so he had this dream like about this vision of reigning, but now he was in an Egyptian house and he was a slave in the Egyptian house. And then the wife of Potiphar accused him of doing something that was not proper. And then Joseph's master took him and put him in jail where the king's prisoners were confined. And you just see this like double step of suffering. And this was not for sin. It's like there's something that God shows to a person of reigning. And then there's something that a person that God would cause a person to pass through of suffering. And then how do you get to that reigning? It's got to go through that other side, that pathway of Joseph. And in that prison, the Lord was with Joseph, extended kindness to him, gave him favor in sight of the chief jailer. And in that prison was very far from the vision Joseph had of reigning. It's like, well, there's a baker and a cupbearer in here, and they have a dream. They have dreams, and I'll just interpret those dreams. And he got the interpretation right, but then they forgot about him, and he just kind of wallowed there for years, until he was about 30. And just think about the 20s wasted in prison. Eventually, Pharaoh has dreams. They remember Joseph. He comes up, interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and then Pharaoh places him over all of Egypt. 40, you shall be over my house. According to your command, all my people should do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. And Joseph was just in that land, finally experiencing the reigning that he had seen in the vision. But it was after all of that. And then Joseph, there was a big famine in the land for 7 years, and Joseph had stored up food in the 7 years of plenty. And then he was a person who had all this food. And he was able, through that store of food, to affect and feed the whole world and also feed his brothers. And then eventually he says to his brothers, God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, to keep you alive by a great deliverance, to save their lives. And then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his household, ruler over all the land of Egypt. And then you just see, wow, what did God do? He preserved the seed. What the house of Abraham. That includes Abraham, Isaac's children, Jacob's children, including Judah, who would come forth from him, Christ. So it's like he had that portion there. And how did he get there? It was through the suffering that God ordained that he would reign. I would say, what is the biggest need of the church today is people who have this Joseph experience. Can there be genuine food? Can there be real life giving? It comes not through saying the right words, but through experiencing the experiences God gave. And that is embodied in Joseph. So I hope we can, I wish we had much more time, but I can stop there. And I hope that we can appreciate that the combined experiences of these three, Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, plus Joseph, accounts for the course followed by God's people on the earth, and that we would really see how this is necessary for our Christian life and our church life. And I hope we can enter into experiences that are higher and higher and higher. So I'll stop there. It's 7:59. How about we take 6 minutes? And then again, these are the rules for our sharing. Begin with, hello, my name is blank. I am from blank. And then tonight I learned, or tonight I was touched by. Again, there's a lot of good things said about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. But we want to concentrate on the verses that we covered tonight, so the Lord could speak, something to us. So, and then we'll take about 6 minutes. It's 8 o'clock now, so you are legally allowed to leave. But if you want to stay for a little bit more and enjoy the sharing, you're invited.